everyone. Now, I know that it's hard to keep up on top of what's going on in the Holy Land, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Israel, I'm Aaron Porras, and this is the Weekly Review. All right, now we begin today with a tragic assault. An Israeli border police officer seriously wounded early Thursday morning in an apparent car ramming attack. The attack just outside of the Kalandia checkpoint in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, just north of Jerusalem. Meantime, the 20-year-old officer rushed to hospital in Jerusalem, presenting initially with moderate injuries to his head and abdomen. Though while stable now, his injuries worsening overnight to a more serious condition. Now, as for the suspected terrorist, the 22-year-old resident of Kalkilia attempted to ram the troops as they were working to move illegally built structures built in the area. And after being spotted on his way towards them, the officers firing upon his vehicle, causing him to crash into a wall. He sustained moderate head wounds and was also taken to hospital for treatment, after which he was transferred to the Shin Bet for questioning. Jerusalem District Commander Doron Turgeman saying that while the suspected attack reminds us of the dangers posed by terrorists against the IDF and civilians alike, the troops' vigilance and quick and determined response was the key to saving lives. Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, UAE Foreign Minister Abdullah bin Zayed, and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken now publicly discussing the need for alternatives to the JCPOA nuclear deal. This has Iran drifting further and further from the negotiating table in Vienna. In a trilateral meeting in Washington Wednesday, the United States, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates issuing more forceful warnings against the hostile Ayatollah regime in Tehran.
We are getting closer to a point at which returning to compliance with the JCPOA will not, in and of itself, recapture the benefits of the JCPOA. And that's because Iran has been using this time to advance its nuclear program in a variety of ways, including enriching uranium to 20% and even 60%, using more advanced centrifuges, acquiring more knowledge. It takes two to engage in diplomacy, and we have not seen from Iran a willingness to do that at this point.
With this in mind, the diplomats confirming discussions regarding alternative means of addressing the challenges posed by Iran. Rhetoric borrowed from Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid from moments before. And Lapid adding that, quote, "By saying other options, I think everyone understands what it is we mean." Further, Lapid making clear that with or without a nuclear deal and with or without United States support, Israel will act to defend itself as necessary.
There are moments when nations must use force to protect the world from evil. If a terror regime is going to acquire a nuclear weapon, we must act. We must make clear that the civilized world won't allow it. Israel reserves the right to act at any given moment in any way. That is not only our right, it is also our responsibility. Iran has publicly stated it wants to wipe us out. We have no intention of letting this happen.
Meantime, Israel already acting on these words. Israeli Air Force fighters reportedly carrying out a strike against Iranian and pro-Iran targets in Homs, Syria overnight. The targets including militia centers, training bases, and a communications tower, and one Syrian soldier was killed with 3 more wounded. Iran's military entrenchment in Syria constituting a red line for Israel, with the IDF having carried out thousands of such attacks in recent years. Iran's military entrenchment in Syria constituting a red line for Israel, with the IDF having reportedly carried out thousands of such attacks in recent years to push Iran back, including a similar strike just last week. As per policy, though, the IDF neither confirming nor denying taking any action.
The Israeli government on Monday officially approved the new appointment of Israeli Security Agency Deputy Director Ronen Bar as the new director of the security agency known as the Shin Bet. Bar was approved for the role following some controversy over an anonymous letter sent to the supervising committee accusing him of inappropriate behavior. Though after an investigation could not find any wrongdoing on his part, his nomination was approved and is set to take effect on Thursday, October 14th. Bar, who is 55 years old, is married and the father of 3. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science and philosophy from Tel Aviv University and a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University. He performed his IDF service in the General Staff Reconnaissance Unit and was later recruited to the ISA, where he served in an operational position. In his many years of service on behalf of the security of Israel, he served in and commanded many operations in the Gaza Strip, Judea and Samaria, and Lebanon, and over the years held operations and units that were awarded several security prizes. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett called Bar a, quote, brave fighter and a daring commander who had risked his life for defending the security of Israel more than once. Bennett added that Bar grew within the ranks of the organization and contributed greatly to safeguarding the security of Israel and its citizens.
All right, we begin our show today with special coverage by our very own ILTV team, who accompanied former United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo during his recent visit to Israel. Pompeo receiving a special award from the settlement movement for all of his work and support in the settlements of Judea and Samaria.
We're here in Yekef Sagot in a special visit by former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, receiving an award from the settlements of Judea and Samaria for his ongoing support, together with former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, members of parliament, and different figures of the right.
It is deeply humbling to be here today in this incredibly special place in the world.
We have no greater ally than the United States, and in the United States, we have no better allies than Mike Pompeo and some of his friends.
Beginning in the ancient city of Shiloh, Secretary Pompeo, along with his family, went on a private tour of the site, learning about its importance to the Jewish people. At the end of the tour, after receiving a special souvenir from the visit, Secretary Pompeo gave a short speech calling out the decisions of the Biden administration and asked to strengthen the policy that is known as the Pompeo Doctrine.
It makes clear that Israel exists within its present territory with legal title and sovereign legitimacy as a matter of international law. The Biden administration is now preparing to reverse that doctrine and have our country once again suggest that the Jewish state of Israel is an illegal occupier.
From there, Secretary Pompeo moved on to the Psagot Winery for a private lunch alongside former U.S. Secretary of Treasury Steven Mnuchin, former U.S. Ambassador David Friedman, and other prominent figures. Afterwards, Secretary Pompeo arrived at the main event joined by former Prime Minister Netanyahu, who came to honor the Secretary for all his hard work and collaboration, and telling the audience what a visionary.
When you came out with your declaration, Mike, you were affirming something that was known and understood by the leaders of the, I would say, the enlightened leaders of the world exactly a century ago. In Versailles, in San Remo, and the other conferences that sought to shape the Middle East after World War I. This is our land. This is our land.
It was clear throughout the event that this award means a great deal to the people of Judea and Samaria, as Pompeo was the first U.S. Secretary who officially recognized the legal status of the settlers which allowed them to build.
We remember his declaration that says that the Jewish community here in Judea and Samaria, they are under the law, under the international law, and Jewish can build in Eretz Israel, in the Jewish land. So for us, the Secretary of State, the former Secretary of State, will be always our big friend and big support of Israel and big support of the heart of the Bible land.
So, looking at the broad picture, I find this a very positive event from the aspect of Israel, from the aspect of Israel's security. It tells you that more and more people in the US understand that Judea and Samaria are part of the state of Israel, and that Israel needs those areas for its security and for its future.
And when it came time for the guest of honor to speak, he told the audience that despite all the scary premonitions that the decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem will lead to war, ended up with a recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of a Jewish state, and also telling the world a simple truth.
Was that the rightful capital of this nation ought to be the place where we have our embassy. I'll never forget the meetings that said there will be war. This will create intifada. This creates enormous risk. And yet, President Trump was bold. He was prepared. We did the work. And we made the simple, truthful statement and moved our embassy to the rightful capital of the Jewish homeland. We made the simple statement that Israel is not an occupying force in Judea and Samaria.
But throughout the entire event, one question was in everyone's mind. Will we see Secretary Pompeo on his way to the White House in 2024?
I can only learn from the past, and with my understanding of this behavior of this specific individual, that he has plans for the future, and we obviously are part of these plans.
Asaf Nissan, ILTV.
All right, also on Monday, Jared and Ivanka Trump were in Israel to launch a new initiative in Jerusalem, advancing the Abraham Accords that saw Israel normalize ties with Arab countries, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. The Israeli Knesset launched the Abraham Accords Caucus, which includes over 100 members of Knesset and is led by Ophir Akunis of the Likud Party and Ruth Wasserman Lande of Blue and White Party. Jared Kushner, former senior advisor to U.S. President Donald Trump and a major architect of the Accords, spoke at the event and said that the Accords created a new paradigm in the region. And he called to act to ensure they fulfill their potential. He said that there could be very different outcomes to the Accords depending on the current leaders' actions. Since U.S. President Joe Biden took office, no new peace deals have been announced. The Foreign Minister Yair Lapid is set to go to Washington next week to hold trilateral meetings with U.S. and United Arab Emirate officials, in part to discuss expanding the Abraham Accords to include other countries in the Middle East.
Now, while Foreign Minister Lapid was meeting opposite United States officials in Washington, Israeli and international heads of state, diplomats, experts, and CEOs addressed English-speaking audiences at the annual Jerusalem Post conference entitled "The Future is Now, Part 1." And during the 3-hour-long summit, speakers discussed regional issues and international cooperations on a wide expanse of topics. But perhaps making the biggest waves, Israeli Justice Minister Gideon Sa'ar harshly responding to President Biden's push to reopen the U.S. consulate for Palestinians in Jerusalem. The consulate was closed in 2018 under the orders of President Trump.
There's a lot of talk right now within the Biden administration of opening a consulate in East Jerusalem or in Jerusalem for the Palestinians and for the Palestinian Authority. That would require approval, as far as I understand, not only from the Foreign Ministry, but also from your ministry, the Justice Ministry. Is that something that you're prepared to do, to sign off and sit in a government that allows?
No way.
So
no
what
way.
does that mean? No way. But if Biden's administration insists on it, what do you do?
I've heard. I want to make it very clear. We oppose it. We don't oppose it now, and we will have a different opinion after the budget. We are 100% opposed that.
Now, Sa'ar then adding that Israel's sovereignty should be respected and that Prime Minister Bennett is in agreement on the issue. The whole exchange lending credence to concerns, however, that the United States is either unwilling or unable to effect change vis-a-vis a two-state solution. Ramallah, therefore, reportedly also looking to other world powers to take over as mediator in Washington's stead.
The fourth wave of the coronavirus in Israel seems to have nearly passed, with the government rolling back restrictions Sunday. Despite this, a 16-year-old boy died tragically Saturday from post-coronavirus syndrome, the first fatality from such a condition in Israel since the pandemic began. Let's take a look at the report.
16-year-old Aiden Jamal from Jaljulia died on Saturday from post-coronavirus syndrome, the Schneider Children's Medical Center announced. The teen, who was not vaccinated, suffered from pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome, known as PIMS for short. It's a rare condition that may develop in some children after exposure to the coronavirus. As such, he was transferred to the Children's Hospital nearly 2 weeks ago, and as his condition deteriorated, was connected to a heart-lung ECMO machine. Since the pandemic began, there have been over 100 cases of the syndrome discovered in Israel, though Jamal's death marks the first such fatality. Yet, despite the tragic loss, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett announced that as of Sunday, a pilot program to put an end to mass quarantines at schools in green communities would take effect. The program, called the Green Classroom, entails that pupils in a class in which a verified case is found will undergo PCR tests to be carried out at IDF Homefront Command testing sites, or HMOs. The pupils will remain in quarantine until negative test results are received, and then afterwards will return to regular studies in class, but will continue taking rapid tests with antigen kits for 7 days. On the 7th day, an additional PCR test will be carried out, and when negative test results are received, the entire class will return to routine. Currently, though, the plan only applies to elementary school children, and should 4 children from the same class test positive, the entire class will have to enter quarantine regardless. Additionally, the exemption from quarantine only applies to school hours. After school, children will still have to remain at home and in quarantine. The plan is set to gradually be applied in 127 green communities. And also on Sunday, some 350,000 students finally getting back to classes on campus for the first day of the new semester at Israeli universities. And according to the Council for Higher Education, this marks a 4% increase compared to the last academic year. And so, with only 1,023 new coronavirus cases diagnosed on Saturday and the reproduction rate, or R, down to 0.71, life seems to be returning back to normal in Israel, with students back in school and the government easing additional restrictions, hoping that there won't be a fifth wave on the horizon.
Moving on, it's the biggest water deal ever between Israel and neighboring nation Jordan. Jerusalem formally agreeing to double the amount of fresh water that Israel sells to Jordan to 50 million cubic liters every year. According to one estimate, Jordan's water supply is enough to sustain just 2 million people, 1/5 of its total population. So as one of the planet's most water-deficient countries, Jordan has long been cooperating with Israel on the issue. In fact, these agreements even predate the Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty of 1994. Energy and Water Resource Minister Karine El-Harar saying that the deals are proof that Israel wants good neighborly relations. And Israeli Director of Regional Environmental Group, Eco-Peace Middle East, is likewise saying that this reflects the growing understanding that the climate crisis is affecting the region must lead to increased cooperation. As for where the water is coming from, much of the Israeli-provided water is sourced from the Jordan River, with the additional 25 million cubic liters set to be drawn from the Kinneret, also known as the freshwater sea of Galilee.
Now, Israeli-American economist Joshua Angrist, a professor of economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, was one of the awardees of the 2021 Nobel Prize in Economics. Hannah Rifkin with the report.
Professor Joshua Angrist, an Israeli-American economist, along with David Card and Guido Imbens, won the 2021 Nobel Prize in Economics for their groundbreaking work using natural experiments to show real-world economic impacts.
The kind of methodological work that Guido Imbens and I focused on over 30 years ago, we started thinking about this, is how to come up with strategies that provide evidence that's as good as the evidence that you would get if you were able to run a randomized trial for something like the effects of charter attendance. And we built, initially, we had sort of an idea, and then that became a framework for the use of statistical and econometric methods that mimic the sort of research design that you would get in a clinical trial without actually having to do the trial. Now, you can't always do that, but often you can do that using natural variation.
Though despite the great honor, Angrist says he had a winding road to success. Angrist was born in Ohio and grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. After receiving his BA in economics from Oberlin College, he dropped out of the Hebrew University graduate program to join the Israel Defense Forces, but later went on to receive a PhD from Princeton and eventually found his way back to the university as a senior lecturer in economics from 1991 to 1995 and associate professor in the economics department from 1995 to 1996. He then returned to the university in 2004 to 2005 as a Lady Davis Fellow. Following his appointment at Hebrew University, he joined MIT, where his work at the institution earned him the Nobel Prize.
It's just the greatest honor a person could have. It's a high point of my life.
All right, for this next story, I want to talk to you about wine. Israeli archaeologists now unveiling a massive 1,500-year-old production complex that would make even Dionysus blush. Welcome to Yavne, a central Israeli city soon set for expansion and home to wine-making history. The Israel Antiquities Authority now revealing 2 years of excavations in Tel Aviv, and what they found is astounding. A 1,500-year-old Byzantine-era wine production site, believed to be the largest in the world at that time.
I'm sitting at the moment in the midst of a large wine press on the trading floor. This is just one of 5 large wine presses at this site. And this gives an idea of the large quantity of wine that was produced here. We're talking about 2 million liters annually from this one site.
5 massive and well-preserved wine presses, each measuring about 225 square meters, in addition to huge collection and fermentation vats discovered at the site. And that's just a small taste of what's been found. In fact, the production was so massive that it was likely known throughout much of the Byzantine world via the ports of Gaza and Ashkelon, for which the wine is named.
And Gaza wine was a trademark wine that was from the whole of this area of the southern part of the coastal plain. We have to realize that this was a prestige wine. It was a light white wine, and it was taken to many, many countries around the Mediterranean. We're talking Egypt, we're talking Turkey, we're talking Greece, maybe to southern Italy as well. So this was a wine that was widely distributed around the Mediterranean.
Additionally, 4 warehouses for aging and marketing the wine and kilns for firing the clay amphora in which the wine was stored were among the artifacts recovered, proving once again just how professional and industrial the complex really was.
In the excavation here in Yavne, the main find are jars. And this jar is the most typical jar that we found at the site, a jar which is known as a Gaza jar or an Ashkelon jar, which are very, very similar. The shape, which you could even sort of compare with a cola bottle today, was something which was completely known to anybody who saw them. And these were typical jars which were used for wine that came from the area of the southern coastal plain in Israel. And of course, we have many other finds. These jars over here are called Palestinian baggy jars, and they are the main kind of jars which were found all over the area of Israel right through the Byzantine period. We have these oil lamps which are dated to the same period as these jars. And we have also oil lamps which come from a later period, from the early Islamic period. These are dolls, children's toys, which were found also at the site.
Now, as for the uses of the Yavne product line, don't think that the drink was just for partying adults alone. Children were just as likely at the time to imbibe this divine nectar.
First of all, people enjoyed drinking wine, but beyond that, this was a major source of nutrition. And this was a safe drink because the water was often contaminated, so they could drink wine safely, and then they could also, of course, take it in as part of their daily diet.
In fact, when not substituted for water altogether, wine was also often used as a concentrate to improve water's taste. And this practice long predates these recent finds, too. Excavations in Tel Aviv also revealing even older wine presses from the Persian period about 2,300 years ago, proving a continuum of existence in the wine industry in the area for many centuries. Hello and thank you for joining me on ILTV. I'm Aaron Porras, and for the last few years, it's been my pleasure to provide you with the insider's look at Israel and the Middle East in English. Your support for us means the world. But there's so much more of Israel to see and do. That's why I'm honored to introduce our all-new streaming platform, ILTV Plus, where you'll find all of the classic and original ILTV content that you know and love, plus so much more. I'm talking more direct engagement with me and the ILTV team, live streams from holy sites, interviews and lectures with the nation's top minds and personalities, and virtual walking tours across the country, just to name a few. What you won't find are ads, sponsored content, and special interests. It's just Israel 24/7 in the palm of your hand. So sign up for your free trial today at ILTV.tv or through the Apple app and Google Play stores. See you there. And that's it for ILTV's weekly review. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next week.